Members coming in from all over the country to express our concerns about all of these crises. And we genuinely could go for hours upon hours, but the hour is getting late tonight and our special order hour is running out. But I just want to reiterate again some of the things we highlighted in this last hour on the floor here in the People's House tonight. We addressed this economic crisis. It's just staggering. A $30 trillion federal debt is a number that previous generations of Americans couldn't even imagine. We talked about the crime crisis and the utter lack of responsibility that Democrats in charge have shown and that the White House has shown to address this issue. The border crisis and now the fentanyl crisis that is directly related to that has become the #1 killer of Americans age 18 to 45 in this country. And the energy crisis. And because I come from an energy state, the state of Louisiana, I just want to conclude with a couple of remarks to just put a fine point on that latter issue before we close this evening. Mr. Speaker, the problem here is that, as with all of these crises, all of this is totally avoidable. All of this is the result of policy choices. It's bad decisions, bad policy by the White House and by the Democrats in charge. Mr. Speaker, on the energy crisis, President Biden's anti-energy agenda has caused the price of a gallon of gas to skyrocket to $3.42 nationally. And last week, oil prices hit $90 a barrel. $90 is a 7-year high. In just the last month, oil prices have surged 37%. That's in 1 month, and it's been on a steady and rapid increase. Given this agenda and the rapid rise in prices, it is not surprising that, according to a recent Gallup poll, American satisfaction with our energy policy is the lowest in 2 decades. That's because Americans have paid at the pump more now than they paid since the Obama-Biden administration. U.S. households will also pay between $700 and $1,700 more for heat this winter, depending on where they live and what type of fuel they use. And more than 1 in 4 Americans report now that they skip basic expenses to pay their energy bill in the past year. And 1 in 5 Americans report they could not pay their full energy bill. This is a crisis. And let me just tell you, to break it down in layman's terms, why this is happening. From the very beginning of the Biden administration, the first couple of weeks, as soon as he took office, he issued that slew of executive orders, a record number of executive orders. And among those early executive orders were his directions on energy policy. He reflexively did exactly the opposite of what the previous administration, what President Trump had done and accomplished. We were energy dominant, not just energy independent. We were energy dominant because of the Trump-era policies. So what's President Biden do? He does exactly the opposite, reflexively almost. Because President Trump moved us to domestic oil and gas production, to increase that, to make us energy dominant, to make us a net exporter, what does President Biden do? The opposite. He shuts down, he puts a moratorium on drilling exploration on federal lands, including offshore, off the coast of states like mine, Louisiana. That was a killer for the national economy. It's a direct contributor to driving the costs up. He also killed the Keystone Pipeline, of course. That was a big source, an artery, as it were, for domestic production and supply in our country. And by doing that, here's the great irony. He ostensibly, the reason for doing all those things was he wanted to help the environment, I guess. I guess he owed it to some interest groups or something, but they claim that would be better for the environment if we moved away from fossil fuels, as we always hear. But here's the great irony, and I'll close with this. When President Biden shut down domestic production, not only did he drive up the cost of all the fuel that we need to heat our homes and to fill up our gas tanks and all the rest, not only did he increase the pain on American consumers, but here's the irony. When they shut down domestic production, the demand for fossil fuels, oil and gas, in this country didn't go down. The demand didn't change nationally just because the president decided that he didn't want to supply it anymore. In fact, the demand is at least stabilized or in some cases gone up. So what does that mean? Well, Americans have to get their supply from somewhere else. If we're not going to produce it here, the bountiful resources that God has given us beneath our own feet, we're not going to do it here. We have to get it from somewhere else. So the Biden administration turns to OPEC. They turn to Russia, Saudi Arabia, begging for more production, begging for our supply to be met from these overseas parties. And you know what the irony is? The greatest irony about all of this? Ostensibly, they wanted to help the environment. But you know what they do when we get more of our oil and gas from Russia and Saudi Arabia? We do exponentially more harm to the environment. I mean, if you believe their metrics, this is a terrible policy solution. Because guess what? We produce oil and gas in a much cleaner fashion in the United States than they do in those other countries. So, you know, the great irony is not only do they drive up costs for American consumers, not only do they increase the pain for everybody, they're actually doing more harm to the world that they claim that they want to help. It's truly unbelievable, not to mention that it's destabilized us, put Russia in a better position, and now we see the results of that on a whole different crisis that we didn't even have time to address tonight. Mr. Speaker, I'm out of time. I yield back, but I would just close by saying the American people cannot tolerate this for much longer, and they won't tolerate it for much longer, and we cannot wait for this election cycle that comes up later this year, where we will get an opportunity to be returned to the majority to govern this place again and to bring some sanity back to Washington. With that, I yield back.